going to be great because this is my crack team. We got 4 of the best students I've ever had all in a row. And so my first reader is for the MA is Casey Telesk. And the relationship for the last year has been, I say, you should do this, and he says, well, no, I don't think so. And then I yell, and then I hang up, or we email, and then I wait a few days, and then I get an email saying, you were right. So that's been the pattern. You were right, and I've decided to meet you halfway, which of course is only about a quarter of the way, but it's an improvement. So now we have this finished first draft of a truly amazing novel that's very layered, very multi-layered. There are many time flashes back and forward, and there's a perhaps schizophrenic, perhaps not, character who time travels, and it's absolutely incredible. And it's been a total pleasure to work on this book, and we've really come a long way. And despite all the, well, no, I don't think so. The book is really, the draft is done, and the work is extraordinary. So please, after a very long semester, help me welcome Casey.
Thank you, Kaylee. My novel is called The Assassination of Bob Barker. You don't have to know anything for this. As you come into this, you meet these characters for the first time. The other thing you have to know is that Perugia is an American commune where cults living in the 1960s. This is Perugia, April 14th, 1960. The silent blue sky was overrun by dark, curling clouds that blocked out the violence of the sun, and Gretchen Mulholland's legs grew tired of walking. The clouds moved quickly overhead as she and the others retreated to the silos on the east side of the 200-acre farm, where Marshall had stored supplies in anticipation of a day exactly like this one. The rain was coming, no doubt about that now. Storm's coming, she said, in a quiet voice to Emmanuel, the boy at her side. He was small for his age, about 5, and wore a dark brown tunic with a beige-colored vest. His hand was so small in hers, and she could feel the presence of God inside him. It was like a low, warm light against her skin, like the sun that couldn't now be seen, but she knew and could feel was there. The soles of her shoes were worn thin, and the rocks dug through into the bottoms of her feet. With every step, the pain grew, but she knew they would soon reach their destination. It was the boys' second July on the farm, and the last 2 were particularly hot and damp like a swamp. Only the ground was dry this time of year, and they needed a good rain to come for the crops, for themselves. They were only a few days from cutting the field for hay, and at the top, just beyond the main house, was a sycamore, standing tall, like her grandfather once did. And now, as she looked out across the rolling hills of high grass that stretched like small thin hands towards heaven, she realized that it could not last forever. Nothing lasts forever, just like her son, who was buried there in the field under the tall sycamore. Her baby had come right here on this farm in her own childhood bed, with lots of pain and blood and trouble. She was already in her late 30s, too old for a first one. There was only the old veterinarian to help because Marshall would not call a real doctor. Little Tommy was never well, never healthy. His lungs were weak. When he began to cough up blood and the seizures started, she wrapped him in a thick blanket to leave for the hospital, and Marshall met her at the door with a rifle. He said he'd shoot them both the moment they stepped foot on the other side of the road. He declared there was no reason for her child to go to a hospital. Little Tommy lived 2 more days. Gretchen held Emmanuel's hand as they kept walking. On their left, the mountains lifted up to the sky, and the trees were as green as they were going to get this year. And in a few short months, they would die, to come to life once more in the spring, the nature of existence turning. Marshall was there waiting at the silos as they arrived. He was standing on the makeshift stage, behind a pulpit he'd hand-carved from a large mahogany tree. His white hair was slicked across his forehead from sweat. When the crowd had all gathered, he raised his hand in the air and a wave of silence washed over them. And she could feel the worry come upon the boy, suddenly, almost violently. He knew as well as she did what this all meant. Even though he didn't understand the external pressures the commune had come under in the past several months, he was intuitive enough to know that something was not right, that something wicked existed here, and that it had to end. No one ever talked about the things that Marshall did out in the barn during the early morning hours before the cock crowed, either because they were too afraid or did not care to know. But she knew everything. One night, while washing the dishes, she'd overheard Marshall call what he was doing in the barn God's work. And she'd grown numb to Marshall's follies. But last night, as Gretchen had peeked through a hole in the barn door, she saw what she always knew would one day happen, and confirmed the note left under her pillow a few days ago by an anonymous member of Perugia. He's going to kill us all. She could see from his face this was to him a very peaceful experiment, so clear, so obvious. And she watched as he concocted the elixir with which he planned to kill them all. 2 horses had been found extremely sick the week prior, and the doctor couldn't say why. But now it was clear he'd been testing to see how much cyanide was needed to kill a human being. But earlier this morning, just before dawn, an explosion some distance from the main house had made the window panes rattle in their frames. Gretchen had been in the kitchen with the manual, who had just asked when she would be happy again. As soon as it rained, she told him. Now the barn was no longer there, blown into oblivion, and she glanced down to the boy standing at her side among Marshall's faithful, and she smiled for the first time in a very long while. "It's not raining yet," the boy whispered in his little voice. "It will soon," she replied. He smiled back. For some reason Gretchen could not fathom, Marshall fervently believed Emmanuel had a great destiny, that he was the Christ child sent to lead them, and the rest of the commune followed him in this belief. But Gretchen didn't believe, even though she could feel God inside the boy. He was special, no doubt. Sometimes when she was close to him and no one else was around, she swore she could feel when he was sad, the rare times when he was happy. She knew he could feel that battle inside her too. "We came under attack this morning, as most of you already know," Marshall began with the calmness about him that Gretchen found so discomforting. "And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure what can be said about someone, some organization that would want to attack God, attack his people like you, like me." He paused for effect, scanning the crowd, giving them a moment to think, even though they followed him blindly. Since the beginning of time, from the moment Cain slew his brother Abel, men have tried to destroy other men, destroy them physically, and destroy their hearts, their minds. And the men who are coming want to destroy what we have worked so hard to build here, together, like brothers in arms, Marshall said. She knew what he really was, what all of this was, that he didn't believe a bit of what he was saying. For him, these people, their lives, the whole entire colony, was a ship's helm he had seized. "Should we fight?" he asked, raising a hand in the air for a moment, as if he were holding up the option for them to see, then dropping it. And with a fury he raised the other. "Or should we leave them to the mercy of God?" He stepped out from behind the pulpit, clasped both hands behind his back, and began to pace the stage. "Make no mistake about it, children. We are at war, and the enemy is not a friend of God." He stretched both hands towards heaven. "This morning I heard the blast of Gabriel's trumpet, and I awoke there in my bed alone. And yet I heard the words of Jesus, what he said to his disciples. Jesus said, 'Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me.' Today I say, one of you has betrayed me. Scattered gasps and chatter broke through the crowd, and Gretchen felt the boy squeeze her hand. The stranger who called himself Dalton had appeared at the market one Saturday. There's a new boy coming, he murmured, pretending to admire the fresh corn stacked in a pyramid between them. She looked at him coldly. A small boy, and you need to protect that boy at all costs. She stared at the man called Dalton with icy eyes. You have my word. Now Marshall was panting frantically upon the makeshift stage. To the innocent, pay no mind to this. Just grow stronger knowing it was not you, that you are loyal, bathed in the glory of God. She could see the boy's chest expanding and contracting as that low, warm light started to grow within him. What's important now is that the Goths are at the gate, and the only choice we have is to stand and fight for what we hold sacred. We must defend the boy, even at the expense of ourselves. Marshall stared out over the crowd. Gretchen could feel the boy turning inward, scared, trying to hide inside of himself. All hail Emmanuel, Marshall called. Gretchen and the boy watched as all 153 members of the commune, including Marshall himself, bowed before the 5-year-old child. The crowd chanted, "All hail Emmanuel." Sirens wailed in the distance, and so came the promise of a beginning to an end. Their future was uncertain, but finally a change was on its way, which was all she ever truly wanted for the boy. Something different, something more. He deserved a chance at a normal life. She had told him this 1,000 times when they were alone together and no one else could hear. She tried to explain it to him, but each time he'd ask, is there a world beyond this one? He meant beyond the farm, and he'd always ask as though he hadn't heard what she said. She saw him simply as a boy, lost in the wilderness of a world even she couldn't understand. Yes, she would tell him, there is a world out there, a beautiful world. We just have to set out and find it. A few single gunshots were heard in the distance, no doubt from the men stationed along the road to slow the authorities down, followed by quick staccato blasts of automatic weapons, which told her the men's lever-action rifles were not an adequate defense. They'd never be able to hold their position. Gretchen saw the three men, none of whom she recognized, spread out through the back of the crowd, and she saw one of them give a signal. She pulled the boy tightly against her side. The Goths were now past the gate.
Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, I'm gonna just throw one out there. Before, when you had the title, it was really long. What happened to the rest of the title?
I cut it.
Was there a reason why you cut it, or just?
Not really, other than it was the original title was The Assassination of Bob Barker, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Television. Which sounds sort of strange because of what I read, but it's relevant, I promise. But we cut it because Dr. Strangelove is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, and in the book it sort of makes a comparison between the atomic bomb and the television, how they're both dangerous weapons.
Okay, I have another question.
Okay.
Okay, so what genre? Because I heard you explained a little bit during the pitch session what it was, but like what genre does this fit into? Like,
the book takes place in 1981, and it cuts back. So this is in 1960, and it cuts back throughout the book too. It keeps cutting back to the Kennedy assassination. So I mean, I guess it's sort of speculative fiction because I'm sort of I'm speculating about certain things that happened during the Reagan administration. Reagan is actually a character in the book. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's speculative fiction, science fiction, like new wave science fiction, maybe. I don't know. It's hard. Yes.
Why the word Goths for the outsiders?
whether we're gods for the outsiders. I don't know.
Second in Rome.
The second in Rome, but I had heard.
Is capital G goth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had heard something similar to that in a movie, and I was like, "That's really cool," and I used it. I didn't steal it. I mean, it's the same thing. No.
That's a best answer.
Yes.
Good job.
To be honest, yes.